Thank you. Welcome to our Vendor Management and Procurement Community of Practice meeting. It is July 20th, 2022. And we would like to thank very much our advisory board and obviously our staff to the board for preparing us for this engagement today, and certainly for their leadership in selecting topics and guiding the content and discussion. A couple of reminders before we get started. Please feel free to turn your camera on and do whatever you need to do while you join us and engage in the dialogue. Do please keep your microphone on mute. Feel free to ask questions though and unmute when needed. You may raise your hand to speak using the raise hand feature, or you put a note in the chat, and very often someone will be able to respond to you very quickly in the chat as well. If you have performance issues, and I know that we've had a few today in Teams, obviously try closing out and coming back in, but let us know if you're having major challenges. There may be something we can do. Again, ask questions as we go along, or save them for the end. We have opportunity to do both. So please lean into the conversation. You're just as big a part of it as anyone on our panel. So today we are going to hopefully learn a few things. Vendor management is certainly a hot topic, and we all deal with it as IT project managers, certainly. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what you could be doing before your procurement to set you up for long-term success. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the role of the project manager in vendor management. We're going to learn what others are doing, others in our environment, our state environment, to monitor vendor performance. And we're going to get you some tips on improving your own practices for procurement, contracting, and vendor management. So it's a lot of subject matter to bite off for one hour period, but nevertheless, in a moment here, I'm going to introduce our panel, and then we will do 42 minutes of panel Q&A and audience Q&A, and then we will wrap up by 12:55 as promised. Our panelists today, and I would invite them all to come on camera here. We have a number of really incredible panelists today, and I would actually like each of them in the order here, clockwise on the screen, to come on camera briefly and make a quick introduction. And Kathy, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. Kathy Ott, Healthcare Authority. I'm the IT Strategic Advisor here at HCA.
Thank you. Ron?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ron Westman. I am the Enterprise Technology PMO Manager at WashDOT. I'm here to discuss my experience today with the OCIO Tier 2 acquisition process for hiring vendors or contractors. I use the words interchangeably. In several of our key positions of IT projects, such as IT project managers, business analysts, project quality assurance testing, and organizational change management. Thank you.
That's an amazing bit of experience. Thank you. Amy Pearson.
Great, thanks, Stacy. Amy Pearson. I am an oversight consultant here with the WATEC OCIO, and really kind of specializing in the big complex programs that are under oversight in the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Cindy Zielinski. Oh, on mute.
See, I'm so used to not having mute on so that I always forget to turn it on. Anyways, my name is Cindy Zielinski. I'm with the DES Contracts and Procurement, and I am part of our procurement consulting team. And my role is working with state agencies on their procurements. And we also just launched a new program for small agencies where we do more hands-on procurement consulting services. So, and I have some great background experience with IT. I used to be an IT manager with a municipality. So, very familiar with the IT side of things.
Thank you, Cindy. And Marna.
Hi, I'm Marna Jobert. I'm also with WashDOT. I work hand in hand with Ron Westman, and I'm also the Senior Vendor Management Specialist for the Information Technology Division. My focus has been working with all the contract managers who own an IT application or product or service, and we're bringing all the shadow IT out into the light, making sure that all aspects have been covered and reviewed, especially in light of cloud modernization and cybersecurity requirements, and that takes up a large part of my time.
Thank you so much, Marna. All right, I'm pretty excited about this panel today and the breadth and diversity of experience that they bring you. We're going to talk a little bit right up front about, what is vendor management and why does it matter? Why do we care? Why do we do it? So typically, vendor management refers to developing and maintaining relationships between businesses and their suppliers and service providers. It focuses on creating agreements that benefit both organizations and aim to develop mutual trust and respect. This allows organizations to fulfill their core missions and remain competitive within their respective industries. So that's kind of a mouthful. What I'd like to do is to ask our panel here, what, if anything, would you add to this definition about what is vendor management? And maybe have each of you contribute your why. Why do we do this? Why is it important? Cindy?
Yeah. Am I on mute?
No, you're good.
Yeah, I think the big thing for us in following procurement law is we are moving to and doing performance-based contracting, and that is why it's so important to us. And we're just our team helps agencies to put in some of that language in your contracts to help make vendors accountable for delivering that performance that we expect.
Thank you. How about you, Ron? What are your thoughts?
Well, for one thing, our IT, PMO staff and other areas of our agency are always understaffed in terms of project managers, business analysts, and a lot of positions. So we rely heavily on the ability to contract out this expertise needed to help make our projects successful. And we realize that that when we bring somebody on board in that capacity, they're actually part of our team, and we need to work with respect and mutual admiration for what we bring to the projects, because, long story short, in order to make sure our projects are successful, we have to work together and be on the same team. So we see that as a very important aspect, and we don't have those resources. We need to reach out, and we bring them on and include them as part of our team going forward.
Yeah, I love that angle. Kathy, what's missing for you here, and or why do we do this?
Sure. So, and I missed before, for those of you who don't know, I managed Provider One, which is HCA's Medicaid payment system, for a number of years. So my expertise is in all of these areas of procurement, design, development, and particularly O&M. So when I look at this definition, there's one thing that's in it that is a real highlight to me, and then one thing that we might look at from a why perspective. And I think that the statement in the middle about focusing about agreements that benefit both organizations is really important. Sometimes we think that Vendors come and they serve the state, and that's the most important thing to us. But a contract and that management is really about the things that benefit both organizations. So I think that's an important piece of this. And then the why behind it, I think there's a big piece of risk management in addition to the things that have already been shared, so we can make sure that we are including those things in a contract that makes sure that there's no timelines are met, service disruptions, those things that reduce risk across the board for whatever we're contracting for.
Absolutely. Amy.
Yeah, I completely agree with what the panel has said so far. You know, project success will require a strong and accountable partnership with our vendors. And I think the why of this, it's also important that we understand just the roles and responsibilities. And that starts early on in your pre-planning and even prior to your actual procurement, is understanding what is the role of the state and what is the role of the vendor as you go forward.
Yeah. Marna.
So another key component is really focusing on the needs of our business units and providing the IT structure for them, and being the liaison, because their strengths is their business unit, not IT. And when they're contracting with IT companies, they're not quite sure, exactly what the IT contractor is providing. So we provide that bridge to help with understanding.
Love that. It's true. A lot of variety out there in terms of where any project manager or customer at any point is kind of starting from. At a very basic, simplistic level, the process for vendor management involves, these steps. And obviously, there could be many, many more of them, but we're going to talk about each of these as its own sort of process step through entity. And we have questions for our panel for each of these steps. So we're going to start with pre-procurement, get to talk a little bit about the procurement piece of why it's important to vendor management. Then we're going to talk about negotiation and contracting, monitoring during the life of the contract, and then either contract renewal or contract termination or off-ramping a vendor, depending on where you want to go next at the end of your contract. So with that, I am going to jump into the first step of the process, which is pre-procurement. And the question for our panel here is, what can a project manager be doing prior to procurement to set up the project for a successful relationship with the vendor? And I would love to start with Marna.
Yep, you're going backwards. Well, again, working with the business unit, ask them, really dig down deep to understand their project needs, and how we can develop a solution for them that will support their project. Understanding their needs is critical. I've learned that through stepping through different contracts, and as I go, learn to translate what they're asking for into the IT structure.
Interesting perspective. I might want to come back to some of those points. Cindy.
This is an area we focus a lot on when we work with agencies on their procurements. Before we even start drafting those documents, we tend to spend a lot of time in strategizing and planning. And I say that's very important, because that's the opportunity to find out what didn't work with your vendor, so that you can, build in some of those things that maybe didn't work so well. And it's also just a time for, spending on, and I agree with the panel as far as it is a relationship, it's a partnership, and understanding the market and understanding the issues that are in the market. But it's just spending a lot of time. I mean, that's the one thing that I say, because every commodity is different. And I know you guys are talking specifically IT, but I work across the board with different commodities. It's not any different whether it's IT or if it's, acquiring something else, a service or a commodity or good. It's where you want to spend a lot of your time before you start drafting that, and really working with your business unit and finding out what the issues are and identifying some of those, those items you want to incorporate in your solicitation.
So you said something interesting, and maybe one of our other panelists could address that a little bit. But yeah, what I heard was that you specifically equated time with a later successful relationship with the vendor. And so I'd like to hear from, another panelist. What do you think about that linkage between time and happy relationships? And, what else is there for you in terms of setting up a successful relationship? Ron?
Well, I'm in speaking in terms of the tier 2 acquisition process that we utilize, definitely boils around the planning aspect of it. What resources are needed and what knowledge and expertise levels required of those resources. You don't always need the expert or the senior. Maybe you just need a journey support person, maybe even a PM or a business analyst. And then we take a lot of time to define the specific duties that need to be performed, and we call them out. I mean, we start thinking about preparing the statement of work. Are they going to be the lead PM or just a supporting PM? Maybe they're going to handle the scheduling aspect of it. And then also out there, you've got the ability to review the list of vendors that provide that role and learn what you can about past performance or work history. Now, granted, if you go out to the WEBS list or the pre-qualified vendor list, there's hundreds of vendors in each of the categories of service out there. So that's kind of a daunting task. But we've had experience with some vendors who are really proficient in the discipline that they have expertise in, and then you're going to find some on the list that just are more, excuse the term, but are more like headhunters, and they'll offer up any candidate that might have the term project manager or, project quality assurance on their resume. So you got to be careful there. And then you can also use resources like LinkedIn to see maybe past performances of vendors. I'm not sure I really hit the question on the head, but there's definitely a lot of planning, and you kind of have to have your project well laid out in terms of the timing when they're needed and what level, and so that and you can be very efficient when you go after the resources that are required.
Thank you. I think you added a lot to that in terms of kind of the due diligence and focus on past performance. Amy, what would you add?
Yeah, you just said what I was going to say, Stacey. I really think this is an opportunity for projects and agencies to do their due diligence, like it has been described. It's really having a good idea of what outcomes of the project you want, but as well as setting up the foundation. So Ron, you talked a lot about what resources are necessary. So as a project manager, if you developed your resource plan, what positions are you going to need, and are those going to be vendor or are they state? A vendor management plan, how do you plan to manage your vendors once you get them on board? Who is going to be managing those contracts and those vendors? So I think having governance in your decision making, because who even is making the decision about the procurement when you get to that place? So having those key foundational elements or governance and planning documents in place will make your actual procurement just a little smoother.
Love it. Kathy, what would you add?
Sure, just one thing to add, agree with everything that's been said in terms of knowing what you want beforehand and knowing how to present that to a vendor. But one of the other things that I think is important in a pre-procurement phase is to determine and understand what kind, on the IT side, whether you're going to use an agile delivery method or another method, and build that into the procurement. And sometimes building agile methodologies in looks like you lose control in a procurement, but it really increases control when I look at it. And building in the fact that you're going to look and finalize deliverables at the end of every sprint, and it really builds in, you know, the vendor's going to iteratively prove their value at the end of every sprint. So I think that's really important. And then a project manager can also prepare the organization for that agile method. It takes some getting some, it's different. It's like building a house. You don't put a down payment down and then walk away and come back and see it when it's done. It takes commitment and building that into the organization. And sometimes that's really hard to do. So I think that's an important pre-procurement step as well.
I agree. So moving on to the procurement piece, you know, we're getting to the point where our RFP is on the street. That obviously is one use case or user story. What are we looking for in terms of vendor performance during the procurement phase? And what are some early indicators of vendor success? And I'm just going to open it up to the panel to kind of self-select if you've got some.
If I could go one point that I want to make, and it kind of leads into this too, but in the planning, determine whether you want to do what we call, there's several different names out there, but one of them is like an implementation planning phase or workshop, and that you can incorporate in your procurement as well, and you kind of determine that at the strategy, but it's a step in your procurement that you can add at that time. And what that is it's kind of, we've talked about this a couple of times, is, you know, there's the vendor performance, but sometimes there's a meeting of the minds, right? Understanding what the agency's wanting. It's kind of like saying it one thing and somebody hearing something else. So the implementation planning workshop, which is built into that process of your evaluation, gives you an opportunity to make sure that it is the expectation and the understanding is the same. And that's one of the things that you could do, and that would be in your procurement process in doing your procurement, is having that kind of meeting. And it's before you do your announcement of a successful bidder, right? Because you're doing that prior to, so that you understand that this is the vendor that understands what the business need is and what the objectives are and what the expectation is, and also the agency knows that they understand. So it's a combination, but you would do that before your ASB so that you don't find out after the fact, and then you're losing your negotiation leverage at that point.
Interesting. That's really interesting. We're probably going to come back to that one as well, because I think that's fascinating. Almost like an extra step in the kind of the current traditional process for. Thank you, Megan, for spelling that out. For selecting the vendor is we think we've selected the right vendor, but let's bring them in and do an implementation workshop and put them through another kind of, not really a demo, but a different type of exercise. So what else from our panel? What should we be doing during procurement?
I have one huge thing that I look for. It probably has become a pet peeve for me in all the procurements that I've done and evaluated. But if there's a vendor that prepares a proposal and what they say to us is, you know, I've done this 317 times, just trust me, that is a huge red flag for me. And if they come in with a response that says, we want to understand your business and partner with you, I mean, those are a couple of, I mean, just simple things that I look for, but there are vendors who really focus on, you know, we know how to do this, hand it to us, let us do it. Huge red flag for me.
Yeah, that's
Can
a
I
great
follow
point.
up on that, Stacey? Because Kathy, I think that's a really good point, and I think it gets to Ivy's question in the chat about what are some of the things to avoid. And to quickly address that, I think oftentimes we go in assuming the vendor is just going to tell us what to do because they're the experts, and the result is giving away our power and a lot of the control. And so it is understanding during the selection process that you have a partner that you can truly work with, that understands that give and take of a project and the clear roles and responsibilities. You know, and for a concrete example is oftentimes we ask the vendor to manage the project schedule. And that is, in my opinion, one of those places where we give away our power or control. It's often complicated and hard to manage a schedule, but that function belongs with the state and the project team in partnership with your vendor. And so it's figuring out where the state has its strengths and where a vendor needs to come in to fill those gaps for us.
That's a great point. Anything else from the panel on step 2 of this process? Early indicators of vendor success.
I showed Ben on Friday, and then I showed.
All right, somebody's not on mute, maybe. Okay, we're gonna move on. Step 3 in our vendor management process. You've selected your vendor. The parent successful bidder is the acronym. You've announced, what can project managers do to improve our contracting acumen in Washington State? How might we craft our contracts or think about them differently to hold vendors more accountable? I know we've all learned a ton on this, but Kathy, let's start with you.
Sure. I actually have learned a lot about this in managing contracts over the years. So one of the things that I think sometimes we're afraid of is putting, really building the accountability into the contract. So sometimes we're reluctant to look at SLAs and to look at liquidated damages. There are some agencies that never do liquidated damages. I look at those as ways, not confrontational with a vendor, but ways to really pave the way toward a foundation where we understand each other. And if we are looking at those and measuring them from the state side as well as the vendor side, it really increases the partnership rather than reducing it. So that's one thing I think that we can do. It gives us a certainty that everybody has an understanding of the terms of the contract and the way we'll be measuring it going forward. So that's a big thing from my perspective. And along with that, knowing that contractual obligations go both ways. So we don't just come in and say, here's all the vendor obligations. The state has a number of those obligations as well, including knowing and having the expertise on our side to manage whatever it is that we're procuring.
I think the key phrase that you said there, and you said a lot of good stuff, but it was, we do these things so that we understand each other better. And even though it's a contract term that may seem ominous or threatening to a vendor, that's the shadow side of that requirement, right? The positive side is, how can you really understand how important this is or why it matters to our operation? So other panelists here.
Yeah, I was going to step in here. One of the things that in the tier 2 process, very important to be very clear in your statement of work regarding the duties, expectation, roles, and deliverables that vendors are expected to produce. But at the same time, we have to be helpful to them. We have to have what our standards, our best practice, what templates we have, you know. And then as you're making the selection, I'm kind of going back a little bit. You said it's already procured, but you know, as part of that selection process, even ask for examples of specific types of project documents that we expect them to produce, and show that they've had the hands-on experience. They've done those. And then, you know, hopefully your contracts are written well. And if a vendor is falling short of expectations, we have to be able to step forward and exercise the termination of the contract if that's warranted, or ask for a replacement, depending on the arrangement you have. But all these kinds of options and should be documented and available in the contract that was signed. So
that's a good tip. Marna or Amy?
I have a couple things to add. Just really, I think Kathy hit on it a couple slides ago about making sure, you know, the approach, whether it's agile or waterfall or what, that is clearly stated and understood. I think there's also ways to look for partnering within the contract. So, for example, a deliverable review, which was mentioned, yes, acceptance criteria that's clearly outlined, but perhaps it's beneficial to have an actual walkthrough with the vendor of the deliverable, that it's not just sent in a silo via email and you review it in a silo and give your comments. There's opportunities to partner with the vendor to walk through, to get a better understanding of areas of concern or risk, or just again, that partnership and sharing it in the moment and resolving it, as opposed to kind of the siloed approach that we take to some of this. I think also having quality assurance or IVNV do a formal review of any sort of contracting documents, just to ensure that we are meeting, you know, whether it's state or federal standards, best practices, and just to give us maybe that bigger view of what maybe some of the risks are to the contract.
Those are all great points. So I'm going to move into monitoring of vendor performance. Can
I add a couple of other things that I just want to add some of the things that are being said too.
Yeah. Just
to make sure you include some things like your acceptance testing process, you know, how you're going to accept and move forward. There's some checks and balances you can put into your contract. Another area where I see a lot of times invoicing, make sure to put how that you're expecting them to identify that the work was performed, and how it relates back to whatever deliverable or task. Those are some of the things that, because you're gonna, you know, that's part of managing the contract. Obviously, you're holding back payment until, you know, such and such time. There's also holdback. You know, based on deliverables, that you can hold back certain amount of funds that would be at the end of maybe a sprint, or, you know, if it's an agile, you know, that you would, you know, that money would be then available, or after a major component of that work had been done. We talked about identifying roles. Key personnel is we commonly use that as in our contracts, where we are identifying the roles and responsibilities, and not only on the vendor side, but also on the agency side, right? Because then they know who it is that they're, you know, the accountability and who signs off on what. Those are kind of some of the other components that to make sure you build into your contract to help in managing those contracts.
Cindy, while we've come back to this, Betsy's asking an interesting question in the chat about a central contracts office that would have the golden ticket contract all lined up for each project with all the right SLAs and termination triggers included. So can you put that in context for us? What do we have in the state and why do we do it the way we do it?
Oh, I'm not sure that I'm totally understanding the question, so I hope that I can address it. But we, I have been on the initiative of putting templates out on our external facing website. And we have a web page called Procurement Consulting, and it does have some, it has the solicitation and it has exhibits and it has the contract, and we're updating those as, and I'm not the developer of it. It's our legal counsel, internal legal counsel, DES, and so we're putting those out, and we're building on our tools and templates in there. And so I would encourage anyone to take a look at those. And if there's nothing that helps in your endeavors, then reach out to us. And we can maybe find some of those templates. But we have contracts out there, or a contract, and it has different terms and conditions in that contract that may or may not be helpful. But what we always do is we always recommend that you have your legal counsel review whatever contract before posting.
Great. Anyone on the panel want to add anything to that before I move on? All right, so let's talk about post signature on the dotted line. How many of you panelists use vendor scorecards at either the project, the portfolio, or the agency level? And what, if any, performance measures and SLAs have you used that you would like to pass along that you find really effective?
I'll jump in here in the absence of anybody else kind of taking the lead.
Thank you.
We don't call it a scorecard necessarily, but we have the large provider one contract has an exhibit that has a whole bunch of SLAs and liquidated damages defined in it. And one of the things that we learned from a process perspective is we measured them, but we didn't have a time frame built into the contract that said when we would assess. So we knew that they were the vendor maybe was falling short in a particular area, but we waited until we were absolutely fed up until we assessed LDs. That was the wrong way to go about it. So we've now instituted a process where we measure the SLAs every month. The vendor measures the SLAs every month. We talk about it at monthly meetings, and every 6 months, we assess whatever it is, even if it's a small amount. We don't say, oh, it's a small amount, let's let it go. But it's a process that has worked really well for us. And it takes us out of the confrontational perspective as well, where it's something we expect. And that process works really well for us. So that's a way that we actually manage some of the SLAs.
Stacey, I think this. Oh.
Yeah, thanks, Amy.
I think this is an area where projects and agencies can really leverage quality assurance. Oftentimes, quality assurance will provide you that third party or that independent, review of the quality of deliverables, the timeliness of deliverables, and I would strongly recommend that you have all those reviews documented as part of the QA statement of work. So should you ever, as a project, need to escalate vendor issues, you have an independent body that is also either validating your findings or is raising them for you, is giving you the red flag that, hey, there's a trend or a pattern happening here and it needs to be escalated.
That's a great point. And I'm looking at the clock here, so I'm gonna throw out that we do have a couple of other questions on this slide. Again, anybody have any super best practices for monitoring vendor performance? Or where can a project manager start to get help with a problem vendor. Ron, anything you'd like to add in terms of working through the contract with the vendor?
We definitely, we're kind of fortunate at DOT. We have an administrative contracts office, and we, of course, we model the tier 2 acquisition contracting process, right? You know, same as the OCIO does. So we have an outlet for reaching out for assistance if we have issues with vendors, you know, performing their roles. We do try to make sure that we define the roles, expectations, deliverables very, very carefully and succinctly in the statement of work. And you know, the project plan is also a very good tool to use. You know, is that vendor delivering based on their assigned responsibilities according to the project plan? This is maybe a little bit different angle. It's more of the resourcing that you have under contract, not so much the, you know, the project. It's, you know, but so lucky for us, we have that assistance. But I know that Cindy and the OCIO will also provide a lot of help for if you have issues with vendors too, you need assistance with.
Yeah, definitely fortunate to have those resources available to you. Many project managers, you know, either kind of do it on their own or with their one procurement coordinator, and you know, that sort of thing. So other thoughts, Marna or Cindy, on SLA's expectations?
So there, for a lot of our tier 2, there aren't SLAs, but there are weekly or monthly meetings between the vendor, the project manager, and the project management office. So we get a sense of, you know, how vendors are performing and when red flags are brought up, and you know, when we need to get involved and try to help, you know, help assist the project to get the performance they want out of the vendor, or in some cases, you know, to terminate the vendor.
Nice segue, Marna. Thank you. So we're coming to the end of our contract term. Maybe we want to renew the contract. Maybe we want to terminate it and show the vendor to the door. Either way, how do we approach a contract renewal, and what opportunities might it present? Cindy, let's start with you, and you're on mute.
So what we kind of look at is making sure that the contract is clearly stated, right? You know, like if they're renewing it, one of the things we've kind of been working towards in this, you know, performance-based contracting is we, in some cases where we put the term, the renewal based on performance, right? So the initial term could be like, you know, from, you know, a 3-year term, you know, and then conditional for the renewal. You might renew it again, you know, for a couple more year terms, but it's based on their performance and based on, you know, so we write that in the term. We write that in the term of our contract, and so it's very clearly stated that it's not a guarantee. The other thing too is along those lines, you know, if there's a lack of performance or there's a performance issues, that we do have a process of which we would follow, right? There's the, you know, there's a suspension. It's notifying them that, you know, you're not meeting the contract terms. And then there's the, you know, is there a cure? Is there, you know, a method of which you can come to a mutual agreement to resolve that issue? And then ultimately, if they're still not able to do so, then you have your termination letter. But when we've had customers reach out to us for, you know, whether to terminate, again, we always refer back to, tell us what's in your contract. What is it that you have? What allows you to do what, what you're about to do? So it's, again, always goes back to the contract, but, we have the ability to help and provide templates along these lines of what I've just said.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Cindy. I was on mute there for a moment. I'd like to take one other response from the panel to this question. What other opportunities do we see at contract renewal?
One of the things that I've found important and that we've used is to, at the time of contract renewal, expect that the relationship will change over time. And this is more for long-term, large IT contracts probably than for shorter-term ones. But going back and looking and seeing if your strategic perspective has changed or if the vendor's strategies have changed, and build that into whatever renewal or termination if you did, discover that those no longer match. But really looking from a strategic perspective and not just at the operations, and expect that will change over time. And contract renewal is a time to really look at that and change that if it needs to be changed.
A great point. Big picture perspective. All right, I'm going to go around the horn here in the order that you see on the screen. And what I've asked each panelist to do is prepare very briefly one nugget of wisdom that they would like to make sure that you take away from today's session. So Kathy, I'd like to start with you. Sure,
and I actually have two, but they're really short, so if that's okay. One is to know what's in your contract. As a contract manager, that sounds really simple, but often we sign a contract and we wait until there's an issue, and then we go back to the contract and we look to see what's there. So know what's in your contract. The second one, we've said it before, don't turn it all over to your vendor. Grow with the vendor, know what you're building together. And so that's kind of the second one, is to not turn it over to your vendor, and your success really is your partnership together.
Exactly right. Ron.
Yeah, in our IT division, we view vendors and contractors as really as an extension of our IT team, especially when we're short on resources. We go out of our way to ensure a healthy, positive relationship. It's not an us versus them, it's the collective we. They're a part of the team and they play an important role in the success of the project. We have to be careful not to treat them as employees, but we do need to be respectful, ensure they follow standards and best practices, to ensure a healthy, productive relationship. So.
Thank you. Amy.
Great, thanks, Stacy. I would say, like I mentioned before, that I think it all starts in your pre-planning and your due diligence in leading up to your procurement. And honestly, the actual RFP that's produced sets the foundation for that relationship going forward. So really understanding and focusing in on that RFP and your pre-planning are important.
Love it. Again, with time up front is well spent. Cindy, what have you got for the group?
Yep, that's the same thing. I just echoed that, as well as I just want to add another thing that we haven't really talked about was the onboarding. Maybe consider a good onboarding process with your vendor before the work begins. That's, I think, an important component as well, and helps in the success of a project. The other thing too is I want to just reiterate, we have this service. CNP has this service. It's free. It's, utilize it. We we work with a lot of different agencies on a vast variety of solicitations and procurement issues. We're here to help. So by all means, take advantage. And we do have those tools and templates on our website, which we are expanding on.
That's great news. Thank you. Marna.
And I'm going to sound like a broken record because the pre-planning is critical. Without that knowledge and in-depth knowledge from the business and knowing exactly what we're looking for with a vendor, we're not going to be successful. So having a good foundation is the most important part. You know, that leads to the great relationships, as Ron was saying, and the vendor knowing exactly what they need to provide to the project.
Great. Well, obviously, we're a little bit past time. If you do have a question that we didn't get to today, and I imagine many of you did, drop it in the chat. As I wrote a little bit ago, we will respond to any of your questions in our August, kind of an email newsletter that we send out on alternate months. Happy to attempt to answer any of your questions on this. I want to say a huge thank you to this amazing panel and appreciate so much their preparation. Michelle has posted a survey for today's event in the chat. If you see that, click on it. It's real quick, 2-minute question to let us know what's going well for you, what we could be doing better. Please join the Teams community if you haven't already. Remember that you can claim PDUs for this time and those add up. And feel free to contact us in the project management partner team with any questions at all, and we will make sure we get you the answers that you need. So with that, I will bid you all adieu and thank you. And please join us in September for a session on integrated project planning, which you said you were interested in. So come back and see us. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you,
all.
everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
have a great day.